Hey friends, welcome to Embracing Your Season. I'm your host, Paige Peel. Did you know that there are millions of youth within a urban context that have their entire funeral planned, from the color of their casket to the music that they want to have played, yet they lack a plan for their future, like graduating in high school or what kind of job that they want in the future? Father Greg Boyle indicates that there is a systemic issue causing a lethal absence of hope. Thankfully, we have people in this world who are called to bring hope to the kids in this margin. In fact, some are even referred to as hope dealers. And I have one of those individuals on my show today, and I'm so excited to introduce you to her. Her name is Amy Williams. Amy ministers to teens involved in gangs and those lost to the criminal justice system with key strategies of life on life mentoring. She tells us a little bit more about this, which is so life changing and something that we can actually implement today with our own kids. Or if you're serving youth, this is a great model that you can take on for yourself in your own ministries. Amy is a project coordinator at New Life Centers, bringing restorative justice programs to youth and juvenile prisons. Amy has done tons of things in her life, including being a youth pastor, a reentry coordinator, and a youth minister and advocate. She has just released her new book called Worth Seeing, and it gives us a glimpse into serving the youth that are struggling in gangs or urban contexts. You can find out more about Amy by going to her website at ahopedealer.org. And of course, stay tuned to after the show because I'm going to share a few of my takeaways from my conversation with her. So join me now on this edition of Embracing Your Season with my guest and friend, Amy Williams. Well, Amy, I'm so excited that you're joining me on the show today. I am so excited for my listeners to hear your story and, of course, learn from all the wisdom that you have to offer. So thanks for being here.
Oh, it's a blessing. I'm excited.
So, girl, you and I have known each other for over a decade. Like, we met, if you remember, at the National Youth Convention, and we were on stage. It was both bi-coastal, right? The first, I think it was California, and then it was Georgia. And they told us that we only had like 3 minutes to
Right.
pitch our ministry. And then it was in front of like 3,000 people. And gosh,
Yes.
what a trip, right? It
It
was so
was
fun.
so much fun. And we had to do like a special thing with the videos in the
That's
background. And
right.
and
That's
I
right.
just remember when I was done, I just wanted to like drop the mic and just walk off the stage. It was
Yes.
fun. It was a lot of fun.
It was, and that's how not only did I meet you, but it was a great networking experience as well, and that's how I met Jim Burns with Homeward, and of course, he's a sponsor of this podcast, so we're so thankful for opportunities like that. But
Yeah, Youth
I would
Specialties is a great conference, was a great conference back in the day.
yes.
So that was fun.
Yeah. So I got a chance to get to know you and your story a little bit, but I would love the listeners to hear more about just even how you were raised. You were raised in multiple states, and each state you had a different experience. So why don't you tell us listeners like a little bit about what that was like growing up in those different states?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born and raised in Maine, of all
Mhm.
places. You don't hear that too often.
You sure don't.
And I was born, even more that you don't hear, I was born as a biracial child. So my
Mhm.
mom is Irish, my dad is Black. He was stationed in the military, and they met, fell in love, and just decided to stay in Maine. So the first part of my life, I was raised in an environment where I didn't really experience racism that much. What I did experience was a lot of white culture, a dad that tried to continually teach me and show me our Black culture. But what I always saw was Black men with white women and biracial children. So I grew up in Maine seeing others that looked like me. And that was very helpful as far as identity until I moved to North Carolina.
Mhm.
When I moved to North Carolina, which during my elementary school days, junior high school days, I came to the realization that there are a ton more African American people out there in the world than I've ever seen in my life. And that was a culture shock for me, right? Because I'm growing up in very white Maine, with very few African American people, communities, all of that, and moved to North Carolina and really experienced racism for the first time. It was in there that time that I was trying to discover what my identity was, who was I? Where did I belong? And I had a very important conversation with my mom. And she told me that if I ever experienced racism, ever experienced people that had issues with me, that it was their problem, it wasn't mine. That I had
Hmm.
the best of both worlds and other people had issues with trying to figure me out, but to know who I was, and that was having the best of both worlds. So that was kind of how my young years were shaped and formed, was really through identity, through my race and ethnicity.
Wow. And what a formative statement that your mom made. It's
It
like,
changed my life.
right? And what we can even project to our kids today, because you're talking about identity and that transforms everything, right? It's the
Exactly.
basis by which we live. And so to be told by your mom, especially in this uniqueness of your identity, is just so cool. So I'm so glad that she did that. And what a blessing. We could even share that with our own kids today.
Right. Pay
Yeah.
attention to your moms and what they
Yeah. Oh,
say,
that's right.
because
That
that
I like.
one conversation changed the trajectory of my life.
Yeah, that's so
Yeah.
good. And speaking of like your future, like you love ministering to youth. You've been doing it for decades. So tell us a little bit about how that started and kind of where you're at today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my thing when I came to serve the Lord was I did not want to do ministry, and I definitely didn't want to do youth ministry. Those knucklehead kids who don't listen to nobody, like I was like, I am not the person for that. And God laughed, and here I am
That's
30
right.
years later, 30 years still working with young people. Um, it really started with my ex husband, and we started working with Young Life Urban, and I always thought that he was the one that was called to work with young people. And I was just kind of the helper, right? But God totally changed that when I moved to Chicago. And I found myself then working with young people, but young people on the margins. So mostly young people that are gang involved and those involved in the criminal justice system. So that is my passion. That's where I find myself. And got involved with that because my baby brother himself was gang involved and involved in the justice system. And when I was a teenager, there was nothing I could do to help him. I was a teenager. But now that I'm at the age where I have resources and knowledge and connections, now I'm able to help young people that found themselves in the same situation that he did.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned your brother because I read that in your book and how that has to change the way that you interact and have compassion for people, especially
Absolutely.
that go through that. So tell us a little bit more about just like your experience with your brother and how that translates and how you just love youth well.
Yeah, I think that your greatest passion can be birthed out of your deepest pain.
That's
I
good.
think that I've always been the one to root for the underdog, and I've always been the cheerleader for those that are not seen, right? And so, growing up, knowing my brother, know how talented he was, what a genius he was, so much smarter than I could ever imagine I would be, but that he got involved in this lifestyle and people saw him more for the lifestyle than who he really, really, truly was. A lot of people wouldn't take the time to hear the story, to understand how he got to where he was, to help him. They just judged him, they just treated him like trash, like he didn't matter. And that hurt the very core of who I was. And so I wanted to set out to do something totally different and let young people know that they have value and worth, regardless of the situation that they find themselves in.
Yeah, that's interesting that you talk about how they think they know people because
Yeah.
of the status of like just their choices, for instance. So, whether we're looking at homeless or we're looking at gang members, like we don't know the background of what led those people to those places. And so, your
Right.
personal experience has led to such a level of empathy for people. And I think that's where I even tell my kids is like, you don't know their story. In fact, they don't know all the details of my story. Like, I'm not
Hmm.
having the conversation of when I was a teenager yet. You know what I mean? Because those are
Right.
conversations that are going to be saved for when they're older. But they see the way that I live now. So when they get that background, they will see that actually I haven't always made great choices, that it has
Sure.
you kind of contributed to some of the things that made me who I am today. But I love the fact that this has added empathy for the way that you interact with people, and even just, good challenge
Absolutely.
for us as well, which is
I
great.
mean, and I think that if we're to call ourselves the church, a body of faith, believers, serving God, how can we not take the time to understand the stories of those that are different from us? The stories of
Mm-hmm.
those that God cares so much about. He cares about the poor. He cares about the marginalized. He cares about young people, the widow. I mean, he cares about people that maybe we might not see on a day to day basis, but he doesn't judge them based on their appearance or what he may think of them, but more through what he knows about them. And I think that the church doesn't take enough time to get to know the people. And
Hmm.
we're pretty good at judging people and being judgmental. And we really need to change that. We have all the tools to be able to change how we view and how we look at young people or just people in general.
Hmm. Yeah, and I love that you even point out the story of Hagar, right? Like how she was seen and how it just takes just one moment of seeing someone
Yes.
that really changes the way that they view themselves, as well as the way that they can receive maybe even just hope in that essence. And so, and in fact, I want to go to this is where you chose to move into the neighborhood with the youth that you serve. Now, this is a gang heavy area, but you saw the people, you saw these youth, and you knew that
Yeah.
they needed to be loved on a certain way. And so you quote this, and it's such a challenge to me regarding the church, is that you're talking about, is your church just a building in the neighborhood, or is it its presence felt? The church has the power to transform neighborhoods through its presence. Presence and consistency are the keys to creating authentic relationships. Girl, when I read that, I was like, oh, I even sent it to all my people. I work in a church. So not only
Yeah.
am I a body member, disciple of Jesus, but I am in the leadership of church. And that was a
Mm.
challenge to me. What are we doing to be a presence and consistency in building relationships? So, how can you help us that maybe aren't called to live in the neighborhoods, but like want to be the hands and feet of Jesus?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I had quoted that also would have you think is if your church shut down right now, would the
Hmm.
neighborhood know it?
Yeah, gosh,
Would they
wow.
feel it? Or is your neighborhood, is your church just open on Sundays and Wednesdays to those that come regularly? But
Hmm.
where is the presence of the church felt? Where is the relationship with the community, not just the church members? And so, how do we begin to do that? I think the first thing is to assess the church and see, ask your neighbors, do they know about the church? Have they heard about the church? What can the church do? Build relationships with local churches. Get out there and partner with other organizations that are also doing the work. We have churches that have 100, 500, 600 members and maybe not doing much of anything, but those 600 members can go connect with organizations that are already doing the work. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are tons of ministries that work with the unhoused. There are tons of ministries that work with young people and trauma in the prisons. There are ways that we have to get out of those church walls, find out what's going on in our communities, and pray about how we can help impact in such a way that that God's presence is felt and
Hmm.
seen.
That's so good. And I think on the flip side, which you even address in your book, is talking about don't go to the extreme of making people and communities projects. You quote Bob Lipton in here, and it says, when my goal is to change people, I subtly communicate there is something wrong with them. If our relationship is defined by healer to patient, I must remain strong and you must remain sick for our interactions to continue. And so we know sociologically that this is called like learned helplessness and toxic charity. And so the church
Yes.
wants to serve, the church wants to do all these great things. But how do we break that cycle where it's like us against or us serving or, that toxic mentality?
Yeah, it has to go from they and them to we and us.
Well, that's good.
right?
Yeah.
We can't, I mean, it's what you said. People are not projects to be fixed. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of times in the church, we come to know the Lord, we accept, Jesus as Lord and Savior, and then we're like, now I have the answer, let me go fix people. Let me share this with people. And we do it in a very arrogant, sometimes dehumanizing way, right?
Mm,
And
yeah.
saying, look, I know what's best for your life because I'm healed and I'm saved. We have to be very, very careful that people don't feel like projects. And, I had an example in the book where I had a young person where it just kind of clicked with me that I'm treating them like projects. I'm trying to tell them how they should live their lives. And the truth is, they're the hero of their own stories. I'm just a supporting actor, I'm not the lead actor. And so, stepping back from that realization and saying, we need to do this together. And so I think the
Mhm.
church needs to learn how to work with the community together, to do it together, not in a
Mhm.
silo, not separate, not. I think we take that scripture, "He that is of the world doesn't love God," and we just take that to the extreme where we just detach from the world completely. And that's not what the scripture or God is wanting. He wants us to be part of the community, impacting the community, right? And doing it
Mhm.
together.
Mhm. And then what I love too is that trickles down then to our kids, right? Because we are raising the
Absolutely.
next generation. And so we get to model for them how can we love our neighbors well? And our neighbor isn't just directly next to us, but it's the
Right.
people. Like I live in the suburbs. I get to meet people within the urban context because I'm going out there and connecting with them in a relational way. It just happens that I'm doing it alongside a local ministry that is serving that population. My
Right.
kids get to see that. In fact, we just did this cool thing where I got to know this Afghan refugee family. I brought my kids to this family. They fed us a
Mm,
meal. And that's a huge deal in that culture is to
it
feed us
is.
meals. My kids got to hear their story. And it wasn't about me showing my kids, like, look how good of a Christian I am that I'm coming to their house. My objective was I want my kids to see that other people don't have the same privileges and freedoms that we have here in the United States. That was
Absolutely.
life changing for her and my daughter, especially because
Yeah.
mom was telling us they didn't teach her to read. Her mom is still over there. We can't even post pictures on Facebook because
Mm,
the Taliban is coming after them. That is
mm.
not the context that my kids have in their day to day going to high school, right? This
Right.
is what we get to do. And it's all about building authentic relationships. That's the key here.
Absolutely.
And your book goes over this, which I so love. I loved your book, by the way. I read it in two
Thank you.
days. It was so good. And again, it's just
Thank
such a
you.
lovely thing because you shared your story. And I'm not going to have that context. I'm not going downtown Chicago unless I'm walking with you, by the way. I'll go down there if you
I
are
got you,
walking with
girl. I
me.
got you.
But one of the things that you highlight is life on life mentoring. That's the life changing element of why your ministry is so powerful. So tell us a little bit more about that and why it's so life changing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think mentoring is about the sustained relationship, right? I think a lot of people think that mentoring is about, I'm at this level, you're at this level, so let me just yap at you and tell you what to do so you can get to this level. That's not how I view mentoring. I view mentoring, again, working together, walking together, learning from each other. I couldn't do the work that I do if I didn't learn from the gang member and the gang leader, right?
Yeah.
They gave
Yeah.
me insight, they taught me. And then in turn, I talked to them. They've learned from me. And so mentoring for me is about walking life with young people. With this particular population, it means going to court with them. It means helping them get food. It means making sure that they're going to school, picking them up at school if I need to. It means going to their basketball games, even if it's on the block, hanging out on the block with the kids, finding resources for them. I mean, it's walking life with them. It's not just about a one time meeting once a week and I tell you what to do.
Mhm.
That's not
Mhm.
sustainable. That's not impactful. That doesn't work with this population of youth because of trust issues and abandonment and all of these different kind of things. It's walking life with people.
Hmm.
That's the impact together.
And what was so heartbreaking in reading the population that you work with is that they have more plans for their funeral than they do their future. And it was due
Absolutely.
to what Father Greg Boyle says is there is a lethal amount of hope that is happening.
Exactly. A lethal absence of hope.
That's right. Yeah,
Kids
tell us
are
about that.
kids. I think I have a quote in here from Father Greg too that says, "Hopeful kids don't join gangs."
Mm,
Right? This population of young people, there is a lethal absence of hope in our communities. And it's not just the gang population, it's not just those that are involved in the justice system. A lot of our young people feel hopeless. Whether they're unhoused, whether they're cutting, whether they're in the foster care system, whether they're a straight A student with college potential, a lot of
mhm.
our young people deal with hopelessness. And so if someone is hopeless, they don't see a future for themselves. If they don't see a future for themselves, then what they do today doesn't matter. And so they're more likely to harm themselves, to harm others. They don't really care. And so we have hope. We are hope. We are light. And so we have the incredible opportunity to be that to a young person, to be that to an adult person. Um, we have hope, and that's through God, right?
Yes, amen. Yeah, and what I love is you even have a shirt right now, so those that are watching on YouTube, you are a hope dealer. I
Yep.
love that.
Hope
Yeah,
dealer to the
especially
dope dealer. They
that's
deal
right,
dope, I
in that
sling hope,
context.
right?
I love that, and so actually you make suggestions about how can we help hope blossom in some of these youth. So what are a few of those examples that you can give even us to help the youth?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest things that you have to expand their worldview. A lot of young people are tied to a block, are tied to a city. They don't know how big the world is. They, especially my particular kind of youth, some of them have never been downtown Chicago because they can't leave their block due to other gangs or crossing boundaries or territories or just never being asked to go downtown, not having bus fare to go downtown. So exposing them to a new worldview, introducing them to people that aren't like them, that are role models, positive, joyful people, right? Expanding their circle of influence. Um, Showing them being hope yourself, being hopeful yourself, is they're watching you. They want to know, how are you so hopeful when the world is so dark? So being that example, and there are several other ways that I list in the book that I can't seem to remember right off the top of my head.
Well, I love a few, I have them written right here too,
Oh,
is like,
perfect.
remember, we can't change or save anyone. I'm sure that you've had some youth where you're like, "Man, I want so badly. I see so much potential in you." How do you
Yeah.
kinda deal with that kind of disappointment or frustration when they're not changing?
Oh, I think so. I'm a recovering control freak, right?
Okay.
I work very hard to not be the control freak that I used to be, and I just have to realize my role, right, in their lives. I have to realize God's role in their life. I
That's
mean,
good.
God has never removed himself from their lives. I have a young person that I was just talking with recently who was like, I turned my back on God. I know he's punishing me. I know he wants me, and I'm just like, there is no judgment here. Just come home. Just come home. God is not punishing you. He just wants you to come home. Right. So having that spirit of knowing that God is the one that is going to draw his people to him, and that
Mhm.
there's really not much I can do outside of loving and being patient and praying. But God is the one who has to change the heart. I can't do that. We can't do that. We're not
Mhm.
that powerful. And so
Mm.
stepping back and just realizing, right, like God is in control of this young person's life.
Hmm. And that's a statement for all parents, even married people, someone that is dating someone else. Like, we need to remind ourselves that we are not the catalyst of change. We can bring
Exactly.
positive affirmation, even negative reinforcement, but it is ultimately God and the Holy Spirit that can do the changing in us. So that's a good message in
Exactly.
and of itself. That's great.
And I have to remember too that that young person is in control of their life too. They have to make the decision change. I never
Mhm.
tell a kid to leave a gang because they have to leave the gang in their heart first. And then once their heart is like, this isn't the life for me, I don't want to risk my life anymore, it's not healthy for me, then I'm there to say, okay, then let's look at life in a different way, right? But I can't change a kid's heart. They have to make the choice and the decision for themselves. So doing this kind of work, being a parent, working with anybody in ministry, it takes a lot of
Mhm.
patience and commitment. Working with gang members, I always say this, is sexy until it isn't sexy. Everybody wants to say, I changed the life of a gang member, until they realize, I gotta really buckle down and commit to this. It's going to take years, right?
Mhm.
So, just realizing who we are and who they are and where God plays his role.
Yeah. So, and I think it might help for the listeners to understand a little more of the context of why people enter gangs to begin with. You have that
Mm.
knowledge. Again, it's not just asking them to walk away from that lifestyle, you're asking them to walk away from their family. So,
From their
help us, yeah,
families.
understand a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of there are so many reasons why young people join the gangs, and I can't tell them all. But some of the basic reasons would be, sometimes it's generational. So my grandfather was a gang member, my dad's a gang member, my mom was involved in it. So naturally, this is who I'm going to be. So there's a lot of that pressure. A lot of people join gangs because of trauma, because they're alone, because they need safety, because they need the money, because their friends have done it, because that's the only thing you do in this particular neighborhood. If you're not a gang member, you're going to get hassled, and bullied. Um, a lot of them find themselves really looking for a deeper sense of belonging.
Mhm.
And so if the church is not there,
Mhm.
and mentors aren't out there, and teachers are too busy helping, just control the environment and not able to really pour into it, who do they go to? They go to the gang member that they see every day walking to school, the gang leader that they see when they're walking to the store, uh, the gang leader that's sitting on the porch every single day and speaks to you. Like, there's so much to why young people join gangs, and they're recruited at a very young age. And sometimes it's the thrill of being part of something that's bigger than them. For some,
Mm.
it's about making money to take care of their family and provide because they're too young to get a job. So many different reasons. We could do
Yeah,
a
it's a
whole seminar just on that.
I know you could, and again, that's not the context that I serve in, and so it is so important to know that that is out there so that my ignorance doesn't then make judgment calls that it shouldn't, right?
Yes, exactly. I always say, if you knew the stories of my young people, you wouldn't blame them for joining a gang or ending up in
Mhm.
prison. Like, if
Mhm.
you really, really knew these stories, you'd be like, I totally understand. I don't, now, I don't condone or, support this kind of lifestyle. I'm totally against it. I'm against crime, but I understand. And that's where it starts,
Yeah.
understanding.
Yeah, and isn't that such a testament to grace in general, right? It's like
Yes,
we can walk alongside people that have sinned against us, that have hurt us, that offended and disrespected us because, man, we have received the grace when we have done the exact same thing,
the
right? Like,
exact same
what a
thing.
testament to what Jesus does for us every single day. Well, I would love the
Absolutely.
listeners to find your content and check out your book. I would love for them to get that even today. So where can they find your information?
Absolutely. You can find me on my website at ahopedealer.org. And you can find my book, Worth Seeing, anywhere that books are sold. I know that sounds so cool. I can say that now. Anywhere where books are sold, you can find it. So ivpress.com, Amazon, Target, Walmart, everywhere. And I also have an audiobook that you can download on Amazon.com as well.
Awesome. Well, Amy, this has been so enlightening as well as
Oh,
encouraging
thank
and
you.
challenging. Let's be honest, this was challenging to us. And I'm so thankful for that because that is what we are called to do to our brothers and sisters, to challenge one another to be more like Jesus. So thank you for this conversation. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you, Paige.
All right, friends, I hope that you enjoyed that conversation with Amy. I know I did. Again, I've known Amy for over a decade now, and just hearing some of the behind the scenes of what she gets to do, as well as the experiences and exposure she has to what's going on in our cities, even here today, has just been so enlightening, as well as just challenging of what can I do? How can I help? But more importantly, how can we come alongside people and have authentic relationships with them? And that's some of the takeaways that I have today. And first, in fact, the first one is the big statement of people are not projects. Anyone else get a little bit of a challenge from that statement? I mean, I'm a therapist, I'm a pastor. My job is to walk alongside hurting people. But how many times do I just look at their circumstance and think, okay, I just want to fix this for them? That automatically changes the dynamics of my relationship with them. When in reality, sometimes they just need me to just sit with them, to have empathy for the season that they're going through. And then potentially I can help them with next steps. But the moment that I start seeing myself as having all the answers, that's when the relationship changes, and I'm being in a role that God has never called me to be in to begin with, and it can be unhealthy for the individual I'm walking alongside. So, what a great challenge to remember: people are not project. Instead, they're our brothers and sisters. They've been made in the image of the Lord. And my second takeaway is we never know their story. Unless we have a sit down conversation with them, we don't always know what led them to the circumstances that they're presently in. We can make assumptions, we can guess, and sometimes those assumptions can be accurate. But oftentimes, we allow our ignorance to place a judgment over someone in their present circumstance when we have no idea what led to that place. So, next time that you see maybe even a homeless person or someone that you make a judgment call about the way that they live their life in their present state, and just think to yourself, you don't know their story. You don't know what led them to that place. And so lean in with compassion. And if you have the opportunity, why don't you even ask them the question? What is your story? I would love to know more about how you got to the place that you're at. And not only will you learn about them and their identity and where they've come from, but you potentially developed a relationship with them where you can now walk alongside them and you've learned something new for yourself. About we don't always know people's stories, but we know something was the catalyst to lead them to where they are today. Usually, it's rooted in a desire to belong. Somehow, there has been a lie that we've believed from maybe even childhood that our worth is determined by performance or our gender or whatever our identity is. But the reality is that we already belong because we are children of God, therefore imparting to us great worth apart from our performance. And we get to just live as brothers and sisters united in authentic relationships. This is such a good reminder to share with our kids as well, as they might gravitate to certain groups because they're popular or because they don't want to sit alone at lunch. But the reality is that they don't need to go to these groups to belong because, friends, they already do. So make sure that you're sharing that message at home with your own kiddos, as well as maybe even yourself. And friends, that's it for my takeaways today. Again, I hope that you enjoyed my conversation with Amy Williams. I want to thank you for listening to the show. Continue to tune in every week as new episodes are released every Tuesday, which you can find on all major podcast platforms or on the Homeward YouTube channel. We have exciting interviews coming up, so be sure to tune in again next week for another edition of Embracing Your Season.